In this video, we're going to take our scene switching system that we made in the last one and add a transition animation. While our scenes are transitioning, we are going to be cleaning up and finishing any sound effects or animations our old level needs to do in the background asynchronously, while also letting our new level load things in. So here, take a quick demo and you'll notice I've added sounds, and we'll do this as part of the video to kind of demonstrate when things are happening. So as soon as I hit change scene here, you'll see the transition, and then another sound when our new level loads in. And so we're going to be doing this, adding this background loading for the old and the new scene, and some sounds to kind of help guide our player. Let's get started. In the last video, we made a scene switching system that let us go through or go back and forth between scenes effortlessly, that was easy to expand to if we needed more levels later on. What we did not do though is start actually adding a transition animation and making sure that everything that needed to clean up in our old scene and that everything that needed to load in our new scene was given time to do it before that scene actually switched and the player was able to do things. So that's what we're going to do now. First by making a transition animation, and then by giving signals to each of our old and new levels to kind of tell our scene switcher when everything is good to go. So if I come to our scene switcher, the first thing we're going to do is actually add an animation player. Animation players are one of my favorite nodes in Godot. They're incredibly flexible. Godot's animation system is really, really amazing. And before we actually add an animation to it, we are going to add one more node. So I'll hit Command A, and the node that we're going to add is a color rect. And what we're going to do is make this our fade in and out overlay. And so what I will do is select our color rect here, and I'm going to say overlay. I'll just rename it. And I'm going to hit this layout button and then hit full rect down at the bottom. This will make our overlay stretch over the entire screen. Because it is a child of our node, it will cover the entire screen. And what we're going to do is actually set the color to be black. And you can't see it right now, our overlay. The reason why is because canvas layers take precedence. Each canvas layer draws on top of other layers, and our grass level canvas layer here has another colored rec. So in order to do that, we want our overlay to always be the thing on top of the screen. So what I'm going to do in order to change that is just add another canvas layer here, and we'll make our overlay a child of that. So I'll do canvas layer, canvas layer, and we'll make our overlay a child of this. Now, this is kind of convoluted. Probably the best thing to do here is to make our levels not be canvas layers. The reason they are is just a holdover of before when we didn't have a parent scene. But just for the sake of this video, we'll just do this now. And I'll say overlay layer. And now what we want is our overlay layer to always be on top. So if I select any canvas layer, you'll see it's got this layer property here. And they're all set to 1 by default. Same with our overlay layer. But we always want our overlay layer to be on top. So I'm just going to bump this layer up to 10, and that will automatically have it take precedence over any canvas layer whose layer number is under 10. And so that's going to work for now, just as kind of a canvas layer. And you'll see that instantly, because of that, since I've changed our overlay's color to black, all we can see is a black screen now. So there's two things we need to do. One is that because our overlay is being drawn on top of everything else, we don't want it to actually affect our ability to use the mouse, and it will by default. So I have to select our overlay node here, come over to mouse, and instead of the filter being stop, I need to say it or put it to ignore. What this is doing is telling Godot, hey, this element, this node should ignore all mouse events. This will mean that we'll be able to click on elements that are underneath it, which will be our button, our grass level, and our desert level. So this is very important. Make sure you don't forget to change the mouse filter to ignore. Now, that's one thing. The other thing that we really want to do is change the transparency on our overlay. So for our color here, we're always going to keep it to black, but the way we're going to do our fade in and fade out is by adjusting our alpha value. So we're going to set it to be an alpha of 0 by default so that we can still see our scene. And when we create our animation, it's going to increase the alpha value and then decrease it to fade in and fade out respectively. And so what we're going to do now is create two animations. I'll create a new one, and this will be fade in, and we're just going to add a new track. It'll be a property track. I'll select our overlay here, and we will find color. And here, we'll just make this be 1 second. So I'll insert key at 0 and insert key at 1. And you'll see at 0, it has a value of zeros all around, 0 for the alpha. And then at 1 second, we want to, let me bump this up to 1 second. Make sure your time's at 1. We want our RGB to still be 0, so black, but change our alpha to be 255 all the way. And now if I play this animation, you'll see that it fades into black. which is perfect. It's exactly what we want. So our fade in is good to go. Now we need to make a new animation, and this is going to be fade out. And you can probably already tell how we're going to do this. Create a new property track for overlay. We'll do color as our track. And then again, 0 and 1 second, we're going to add a key. So I'll have this at 0. Let me make sure that time is at 0. Again, at 0, we're going to start with our alpha all the way up. And then at 1, we're going to bump our alpha or get our alpha all the way back to 0 to make it transparent again. And so now our fade out, when I play it, actually fades out. And super easy. Godot's animation player, the animation system, makes it really easy to create a fade in, a fade out, really any basic animation. The reason I used an animation player instead of a tween is just because I think it's easier to edit it via the editor and see it in real time and be able to adjust it than it is to use a tween. And I think for things like this, it's generally better. You get a little bit more fine-grained control than you do with a tween node. So that's why we decided to do this instead of the tween. So now we've got our animations. Now we need to just actually control them from code. And so in our scene switcher, there's a couple things we're going to need to do. First, we need to get a reference to our animation player. So I'm going to say onReady var, and I'll just call it anim just for short, and we'll get our animation player. And now what we need to do is whenever we handle changing our level, we need to play our fade in. And so what I'm going to do is a couple things here. First, I want to move all of our cleaning up, our freeing of our current level to actually the level itself. So we can do that asynchronously in the background. What we want to do for our system is while we fade in, and then when the screen is black, we want to let our current level take as much time as it needs to clean up, but we want to move our new level on top of our current level so that even if our current level takes a few seconds, it doesn't matter. Our old level takes a few seconds to clean up. It doesn't matter. Our new level can get going as soon as it's ready to. So we want to make that an asynchronous process. So we'll get to that in a second. But the first thing we want to do is as soon as we start this, we want to add in our new level. So there's a couple things to think about here. As soon as we have added our next level as a child, we want to do anim.play, and we should see automatically it pops up fade in. So that's what we're going to do for now. But one thing to note is that when we add our next level as a child, it's going to probably draw on top of our current level right away, which we don't want. We want to see our current level until our fade in animation is done. So what we can actually do is say, and do this before we add our child, next level.layer, and set this to be -1, which means it's going to draw underneath our current level, because remember, if I select our layer here, the layer starts at 1. So our next level is going to draw in underneath everything and won't be shown to the player even as it's loading in, even as everything is getting ready and we add it to our tree so that we're ready to show it to the player immediately. This will keep it invisible for now. So we're going to do our fade in animation. And what we want to do is actually connect a signal on our animation player. And we're going to connect the animation finish signal to our scene switcher. So I'll just find that in a scene tree or in our node and signals tab and then connect it. And so what we want to do is actually do a match here. You'll notice that with this signal, we get a parameter, which is our animation name. So what we want to do is match anim name. And so whenever an animation finish, this same function is going to get called whatever animation that is. So we want to do something specific depending on which animation finished, whether it's our fade in or our fade out. So what we'll do is say fade in, because that's the one we're currently looking at. And so once our fade in is done, so our screen is currently black. So what we want to do now is actually handle freeing or starting to clean up our current level down here, because we don't want, as it currently stands, our current level is going to get freed before our animation is complete. We don't want that, because we want our player to see the current level until the fade in is complete, until when the current level is freed, the player wouldn't notice it. So we want our screen to be completely black when we start to clean up our current level. So in order to do that, I can bring current level.queue_free down here. The problem though is we need to set our current level to be our next level. And so we've got a bit of a variable problem here. And what I'm going to do in order to change it, this is one solution. There might be other better ones, but just one way to do it is move our next level variable out of this function and make it an actual variable that we have just at a field we can access anywhere. So I'm going to say variable next level, and we'll default this to null, and we'll set it to null whenever we're done transitioning levels. So I'll get rid of line 15, which is the next level variable, because we don't need that anymore. And we don't actually need current level dot next or equals next level right here. So first things first, we are going to start our queuing free down in the fade in animation area. So we'll start freeing our current level once our animation is complete. And then now that this is the case, we can now say current level dot equals next level. And we can set our next level to be null since we don't need it anymore. And again, this will just make sure we're not storing something that we don't need. So as soon as our fade in is done, let's start freeing up our current level and then change our current level to be the level that we've loaded in. And we'll change our current level or our next level to be null since we don't need it anymore. And let's get rid of this line 31 here because we don't need that either. Now there's two other things we need to do. Remember that we set our next level's layer to be -1. So we're not going to be able to see it right now as it stands, or at least we might be able to once we free our current level, but we want to change our layer to be the correct layer now. So here we'll say current level, since we've just set our next level as our current level. So we'll say current level dot layer, and we'll bump this back to 1. So we're restoring everything that it used to be. We're restoring it to the regular layer that most of our levels will be at. Now, we're never actually calling our fade out animation, so we're not going to be able to see this anyway. So what we can do here is we could just say anim.play fade in, or fade out, excuse me. And so what this is going to do is as soon as our fade in is complete, we're going to immediately fade out. Now, remember, we said we wanted, while the screen was black, to give our new level some time to finish loading in. We're not going to be able to do that if we immediately play our fade out animation, but just to get something that we can see that's working right now, we'll do this for now and come back to that in a second. So if I run our game now, we should see we've got our grass level, and if I hit change scene, look at that. A really awesome animation. It's simple, but it provides a nice transition between changing of our levels, and it's pretty seamless. We don't see anything going wrong. We don't see an inner level kind of things loading or looking funky. So we've made some really awesome progress here. There is a weird line going on right here. I'm not sure why that's the case, but really, like, this looks amazing. This has got everything we need, and we are able to create this nice transition animation without having to use any outside resources. Godot's AnimationPlayer and just a colored rectangle let us create this from scratch, so it's incredibly easy. You could replace that colored rectangle, the overlay, with a some kind of a texture or a pattern, or you can make a fancier animation to do this. That's totally fine. It would look great. We're just doing the basic here so that we have a good thing to demo off. But yeah, it's really easy to swap out the animation or do something a little bit fancier if you want. Okay, so I said there was one other thing we still need to do, which was making sure we gave our new level, our new scene, time to load everything in. Additionally, we haven't really moved our cleanup code to our level either. And what I want to do what I want to do to make it feel a little bit better and to illustrate the changes we're about to make. And so what I want to do to kind of illustrate those changes and help us see them in action is actually add two sounds. One is a sound when you hit the change scene button, and the other is a sound when a new scene loads in. And so when we hear those two sounds, it'll kind of guide us in seeing how things are loading in, and it'll add a nice little bit of juice and effect to our very simple game right now. So let's go over to our level. I'll just do our grass level, for example. And let's add two sound effects. So I'm going to hit Command A, and I'm going to do audio stream. If you've never used sounds in Godot before, it's really easy. It's just this audio stream player. And we're going to add two. This is going to be button clicked sound. And I'll duplicate this, and we'll say level loaded sound. And I've just gotten two sound assets off the internet. I think I got them from Feslian Studios. I'll have that link in the description below. But for our button click sound, I'm just going to have this like a little level up notification. So I'll play this in a second. And now that I've dragged our sound in, I can just check this playing box here, and you'll hear. There you go, just a little sound effect, and that will be what happens whenever the button is clicked. And I can do the same thing for our level loaded. I'll select this, and I'll find our other sound effect, which is just like kind of a doorbell dinging, and I'll draw that in there. And if I hit play in here, there we go. Two random sounds didn't really, correspond to a game, but just to show that there are sounds that'll be played, and we'll our level switching will kind of allow those to finish playing. And so let's actually wire these up to our game. So when I do our grass level, I'll come into our script here. And now when we hit this on change scene button pressed, we'll actually do, we'll do the $sign. We'll just get our button click sound here. We won't store it to a variable, and we'll just hit play. And it's really that easy to play a sound. And same thing too, when we load our level in, so we can just say function ready. And here, all we're gonna do is get our level loaded sound and hit play on that. Now, we also, you'll notice I only added these sounds to our grass level. We'll also need to add them to our desert level. And in order to do that, rather than trying to copy and paste these, I can select our desert level, right click on our root node, the desert level canvas layer, and hit merge from scene. You might never have used this button before, but it's super helpful. And this lets you merge specific nodes in from another scene. So I'll select our grass level because that's where our sounds are, and you'll see both of our sounds appear here. So I can select both of them, hit OK, and all of a sudden, boom, we've got these new sounds here. If I hit playing, you'll hear exact same thing that we had before. Okay, so I think we're pretty much good to go here. There's just one more change I want to make before we try it out. And I was having us play our level loaded sound on ready just so that we could demo it and hear it play. But I actually want to change this to be a function we have to manually call. So I'm going to say, just say like, play loaded sound. And so this will be a function our scene switcher will call when we actually load in our new scene, but it won't happen by default. And we'll come back to that in a second. But now if I come to our scene switcher, and again, make sure that we're running this from our scene switcher, or that's your main scene that's running automatically. If I run this, we should hear that when I hit this change scene button, we change scenes. But you might have noticed that. Let's do it again. Notice how it gets cut off right at the end. And that's because as soon as our animation is finished, we are deleting, we're freeing our current scene. And it's not giving the clicking the button audio enough time to finish. And this is where I talked about wanting to move our logic for freeing our current level to the level itself. So what we're going to do is come into our level script, level.gd, and we are going to have a function called cleanup. And it won't take anything for now, but this is just going to be where we do all of our cleanup. And it's in this cleanup function that we could do any other last minute cleanup logic we need, but for our purposes, we're just going to call queue free. Now, when do we want to call queue free here? Well, it's when this button click sound is done playing. And so what we can do to make sure that we are waiting for that to happen is we can say if button click sound dot playing, this is a Boolean property. So if it's playing, we can yield or wait until that signal is done. And if you've never used the yield keyword in Godot before, it takes two parameters. One is the node that you're yielding for a signal to. So yield depends on signals. So the signal we want to wait for is the finish signal, which is a signal on all audio stream players. So we want to wait for the finish signal on our button click sound. If I click on our button click sound and go to node, you'll see that there is a finish signal there. So that's the one we're waiting for. So we need to say we're waiting for a signal on button click sound, and the one is finished. And you'll see it auto completes it because it knows which signals we have. So we're going to wait for the finished signal on button click sound. So if it's not playing, it'll just queue free right away. Otherwise, we'll wait for the sound. Now, we actually need to call this cleanup function, right? And we need to make sure we're not queuing free from our scene switcher. So if I go back to our scene switcher, I'll get rid of this queue free and change it so that we call cleanup on our current level. And notice now this is totally asynchronous. We tell our current level to clean up and then we totally forget about it. We just go on to our next level. We set our current level to be our next level. And so our current level, the old level, is going to be doing this cleanup in the background and it'll delete itself automatically. And you'll see that if I run our game and our scene switcher, and I'll open up our remote tab over here so you can see the nodes that exist in our game itself. So now that I've done this, you'll see that in our game itself, we have this grass level. If I hit our change scene button, it'll do the transition and now we've got a desert level, and watch our grass level disappear once the sound is over. Same thing if I change our level again, watch this desert level disappear now. And it's happening totally in the background, totally asynchronous, and we've got some really good code that's just kind of handling it for us, which is really awesome. So now that we've got that, there's two changes we can make to really finish this out. One is we can add another case to our AnimationPlayer finished function here, this match. So I can do fade out. And here's where you could do some other logic if you wanted when it's done fading out. But what I mostly want to do is use that function we added to our level a bit ago to play our loaded sound. So I'm going to say current level dot play loaded sound. And then now we're going to actually play that loading sound when we're done fading in to our new level. So if I run this now, run our scene switcher, we'll see that if I hit change scene, it'll give us a notification. It'll give us that little doorbell sound when we're done switching scenes. So this isn't, it's not amazing. I probably wouldn't do that in a game, but just to show you all as kind of an example of how this works and all the different places you can modify and expand and customize this scene switching transition. Now, one other final change I want to make is you'll notice that if I press these buttons, this change scene button very quickly, I can do a lot of damage by creating tons of different scenes right away, which is not what we want. We want to prevent the user from being able to do that. So in order to do that, what we're actually going to do is disable our button. So if I come into our level script, we want to disable our button, 1, after it's been clicked, and 2, until we are fully loaded in. So in order to fix that first problem of making sure we can't press it again after it's been pressed, I'm going to come to our on change scene button pressed function here and just say change scene button dot disabled. This is a property, so we have to set it to be true. So as soon as we click the button, it's now disabled. Okay, that's really awesome. And now we just need to make sure that once we load in a new scene, the button is disabled until the loading is done. So in order to do that, I can actually, come into our change scene button here in our scene tree, go into the inspector, and then I can actually hit the disabled button in the base button. So you won't be able to press it by default. And then what I can do in our level is when we call this play loaded sound, so whenever this is being called from our scene switcher, when the fade in is complete, or the fade out, we can say change scene button dot disabled and set this to be false, and you can now press the button. Now this is going to work except for one problem, which is that in our initial loading of the level, our button is now going to be set or disabled by default. So in our scene switcher, we can fix this pretty easily by just saying current level dot play loaded sound. Okay, so we are good to go, except we need to make sure we also disable our change scene button by default on our desert level too. So I'll select that. And now if I come to our scene switcher and run our game, watch what happens. First, we'll hear the loading sound initially right away, just like that. And now notice as soon as I press the change scene button that we won't be able to press it again. It'll become disabled, just like that. And then did you see there how our button was disabled until the music played? So watch this again and notice how when our level loads in, it's disabled. And then it becomes enabled. So look at that. Not only have we created a really cool scene switching transition system, we've also added some safeguards to make sure that the player can't automatically switch back and forth between levels too quickly. It gives time for the animation, the transition to finish, and we are giving functions and methods for different levels to load in everything they need to do in the background and to do the level of cleanup necessary in order to let sounds and animations or loading or data transfer happen in the background as needed. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this has been a helpful video. In the next one, we're going to handle actually passing data back and forth between scenes, which is going to be really awesome to see, and it'll bring a cap to this series. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If it's been helpful, a like and subscribe is always appreciated. We'd love to have you in our Discord. Feel free to ask any questions there. The link to join that is in the description below. If you do find my work helpful, donating me a coffee on Buy Me a Coffee, link also below in the description, is something that's much appreciated and helps me continue to make great videos. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you in the next video.